So in today's video, we are going to be installing trim around the windows. That's right, in my she shed. I've been working on this shed for, oh my gosh, it feels like forever, but it's been probably about 6 months. And it feels like I am making so little progress. But if you want to see everything in this series, click up here in the corner and you can see from the first groundbreaking to the painting of the shed. It's all coming together. I'm Serena from Thrift Diving, and today we are going to be installing this trim around the windows. There's 6 of them, and it shouldn't take us too much time. Hoping. Today's video is being sponsored by Fastener. They're one of my long-term sponsors, and we're going to be working with the Pneumatic brad nailer to get this job done quickly. Hoping it's quick. Projects never take as much time as you think. They always take 10 times as much time. Anyway, let's jump into this project and let's talk about the materials needed for this project. The first thing is the trim. This was actually kind of a difficult decision. I spent a lot of time in the store trying to figure out what do I use? What's the best one to use? So I decided to go with this. This is MDF. You've got the sides and the front painted with primer, so I don't have to prime it. I can just start painting it. Now, if you're going to be doing trim in a wet location, don't do MDF. Do not do MDF because it will get wet and it'll start to swell. You could use pine, you could use PVC. Honestly, I love PVC because it's waterproof. So with this, even though we're not going to be getting water in the shed on the walls, it's fine. We're going to use semi-gloss. I love white, so we're just going to do white. We're going to be using the Fastener Pneumatic brad nailer. Now we will have to use a compressor for this, which is fine. We're going to be using 2-inch nails, brad nails. These are 18 gauge, and it just fits in there very easily. We want to go into the wood surrounding the window. And we're going to be using genuine Fastener 18 gauge brad nails, 2-inch long. Now we are going to be painting, so roller. I like to use the 1/4-inch roller. This is for smooth surfaces, and this is going to be easier than using a paintbrush. You need one of these. I keep this thing on my hip all the time. So you need a tape measure. Jigsaw. Now if you don't know how to use a jigsaw, go up there to the corner, look for my video on how to use a jigsaw, but we're going to have to cut this, and we're going to use a pencil, and we're also going to use a speed square in order to get a nice straight 90-degree cut. And yes, you need eye protection. Don't forget that. Aren't these swanky? These are like real safety glasses. How do they look? Yeah, those are my new favorite glasses. Okay, so to get this project started, I did a rough estimate of the window, about 36 by 36 with a 3-inch depth. I will tell you, use that rough estimate to just figure out how much material you need. Don't use it as an exact measurement just yet. And don't assume that every window is going to be the exact same measurement. So I figured that I needed about 100 feet of material, and I did buy a little bit extra, and I went with the MDF, as I mentioned, because it was only $1 a foot. It was much less expensive. But also, before you get started, when you take those measurements, the exact measurements, don't assume every window is the exact same. So don't cut everything all at one time. And if you can get help, get help. My niece, Arama, she wanted to help, so I gave her a little painting project. Each of these windows are going to have 5 parts. So the wider board here is called the window stool. I've never called it the window stool. I just call it the window ledge. Makes sense to me. I'm going to use a jigsaw to cut it out. And the way that it's going to sit in the window, we need a jigsaw so that we can cut out just a little square section, which you'll see in just a moment. But in order to make this, we need the window ledge, the 2 casings on the left and the right, the header at the top, and the apron. So that's what we need for the pieces, but this is how we're going to attach it. And we're using the Fastener Pneumatic brad nailer. It shows you on the side there the sizes of the brad nails that it can take. It can take up to 2 inches, which is great. So you can use it for light trim. You can use it for something like what I'm doing, which is still light trim, but sometimes you may do molding that's much smaller, and you can use smaller nails for that. You'll need a compressor. This is the one that I love. It's quiet, and you can use it for upholstery and for your pneumatic brad nailer. And you can find all these materials down below in the blog post link. Since the trim that I'm using is different than the trim that you may use, I won't share exactly the measurements that I used, but by watching what I do here, you'll be able to get an idea of what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is cutting out pretty much a square so that when this piece, which I'm calling the window ledge, when this fits into the window, it's going to leave these 2 little wings extending past the window. So part of it's going to be sitting in the window, and part of it's going to be sitting outside the window. And if you look at the windows in your house, all trim pretty much looks this way. And so you'll need to account for whatever size your trim is. Now here I'm just using the jigsaw in order to cut that out. You'll see that it's an L shape, and this will fit very nicely. If you take measurements that are wrong, it's better to have a measurement that's a little too big than too small. That's how I wasted a whole $20 board. So be sure to do some tests before you actually cut your material. Next, I went around the entire window and marked 1/4 inch because this is where I want the 2 casings to be lined up. Next, I measured the 2 side pieces to see how tall they would be, keeping in mind that I just added 1/4 inch, and then I cut the pieces. And again, this is where you want to measure each window individually, because if you just assume that all the pieces are going to be the same and you cut them all the same, you're going to waste a lot of material. There were times when one measurement would be off by 1/4 inch. And so you just have to just work with each window and see what the measurement is. Now, the next step was to get the window ledge. I'm going to call it the window ledge. Get the window ledge in. I would recommend putting this construction adhesive in the window instead of on this piece, because I did find that it started to leak a little underneath. So you want to avoid that. Just put it on the window and not on this piece. Once it was in place, I just used my pneumatic brad nailer from Fastener and secured it. I did 2 on each side and then spaced them out evenly along the back. Next, it was time to attach the casings the exact same way. I do want to point out that when I was measuring for these casings, I did temporarily have that window ledge in place so I can get the correct measurements. You'll see here again with the casings, I'm lining that up along the 1/4 inch lines that I drew, and it looks really, really nice. Now, there may be times when you may be off just by 1/8 of an inch. If it's off, don't sweat it. You can go back and cover that with wood filler. There were a couple pieces that I didn't cut exactly the correct measurement. However, you don't want to waste an entire piece. So you can go back and fill those gaps. It's not too big of a deal. You'll notice that I'm using a brad nail in the middle, the top and the bottom. That's all I need for the casings. It's got 3 nails and construction adhesive, so it's really not going anywhere. Now, once I had those casings in place, I took the measurement for the top header and then I cut that to the exact width. Again, all windows are not going to be the same, so measure as you go. And for the bottom apron, that's going to be the same width as the header. And we want that to go right underneath of that bottom ledge. Again, here we'll do construction adhesive. And what I like to do is put one in the middle first to secure it, making sure it's nice and tight against that ledge. And then what I noticed is that on the ends, some of the boards had a gap. And so I would just squeeze that into place and secure it on the left and the right, and then add a few more throughout the body. You know, it didn't take too long to get the rest of those windows done. When they were done, I went along to each of the windows and filled in the brad nail holes with just a little bit of white wood filler. And when it dried, I used 220 grit sandpaper to sand it smooth so that you couldn't even tell, hopefully, that there was a brad nail hole there. And also, I did have some gaps, so I added a little bit of wood filler there, sanded that smooth, and then it was time for caulking. Here's a couple of tips when you're caulking around window trim. Make sure that you're using the right type of caulk. This is a paintable caulk that's made specifically for windows, trim, crown molding. It's just going to work much better to make this look seamless and be able to work very easily to blend it in. And you can paint it, as I mentioned. And so you can go over it with a final coat and it will accept paint, which is very important. Now, what I did was I started on the outside and just used my finger. I didn't do any taping. You can tape off if you're someone who's afraid of making a mess. You can tape off, but surprisingly, this looked pretty good and I didn't have to tape off. And I think one of my keys to success here was keeping the hole in the tip very small and keeping it moving at a steady pace. So that prevented a lot of it gunking up, and just using my finger. Well, you can wet the glove or you can use your bare finger, and just gliding it over smoothed everything out. Now here is where I did use tape because some of these gaps were pretty big and I didn't want to make a total mess. So by putting some of the tape here, peeling it back, I was able to get a pretty clean line. And any place where there was a seam or a gap, that's where I would caulk. And by the time I was done, everything looked good. So keep in mind that you'll do all along this area, but you'll also do underneath where the apron is as well. And by the time you're done, it's going to look fantastic. You know, this was a fun project. Finally, I was able to do something that didn't take 2 months. This actually took just 1 weekend. I think it was probably about $150. I'd have to go back and look at my receipt, but it wasn't very expensive. And I think it really adds a nice, attractive appeal in my she shed. It's coming together. It's taken a long time, but I love it. Anyway, you have to come back for more. In the next videos, we're gonna be doing trim around the door. We're gonna be doing the flooring. There's just some things we need to address first, like the leaks that are at the door. But all of that's gonna come together in time. I am so excited about this series. If you want to catch the entire series, go up here in the corner. If you want to learn more about the Aero Fastener Pneumatic Bride Nailer, go to aerofastener.com or click that link down below in the comments and the description, and you can find out more about it. Oh, and don't forget, there's a blog post. So if you love to read about my projects, you can go to the link down below and get step by step on everything that I did here today. Okay guys, I will see you next video.